daunting, and this is essentially exactly what Shut Skate did when they made up these ads. First, they did a vulnerability assessment. They said, what are the implications of climate change, in their case, for skateboarding in Manhattan, but in your case, for water and water-dependent resources. From that, you can design water management and water-related practices to develop durable outcomes. That's called an adaptation strategy. Then, if you're really lucky, you go beyond where most people have gone, and you actually implement that adaptation strategy. I don't know if Shut Skate is starting to make surfboards or not, but they've got a few years, and I think that they can do it. And then finally, you actually want to determine whether or not what you've implemented is working. And that's a really important piece. We need to monitor, evaluate, and modify what we put into place. The number of organizations that make it to that adaptation strategy implementation step is low. The number who actually are monitoring and evaluating the efficacy, I could probably count on my 10 fingers by maybe not lifting any. It's a space we really need to move into, and it's something that's vitally important if in fact we're going to learn what's working and implement it. And you don't have to wait and change it and implement it in other places. You don't need to wait until 2086 to find out whether or not things are moving along the way you think they would be. There are all sorts of markers that you can use to identify whether or not things are improving. If you're replanting with a different species, is it taking? Is it propagating? If it's not, should you be thinking about another species? If you're looking at flow rates, are they changing? What are the trends? What's the timing? How has it been? All those things are monitorable. I have very little time, so I'm going to cruise through this. This is a project that I worked on with WCS and the Center for Large Landscape Conservation with the Great Northern LCC. And it's a tool that you can actually use to sort of cheat and jump forward in implementing that. So it has three of the steps, which is the vulnerability, the adaptation strategy development, and the implementation action, sort of pre-baked for you if in fact you work on cold water fish. We looked at 3 parameters around climate. Habitat suitability. Is the habitat suitable? Will it become less suitable? Will it become completely unsuitable? Or will it become more suitable? Will it become unsuitable? The threats of native, non-native fish. Are they there? Are they not there? And connectivity. Do you have it? Do you not have it? And we used those factors and created this matrix that you see in the center that sort of pre-populates for combinations of those conditions. We don't have non-natives, we do have connectivity, and the site will be useful in the future. And it lays out what are some basic things you should be looking for and what are some adaptation options. And based on the kinds of adaptation options, you can jump to step 3, and it actually gives you some implementable actions that would help you achieve that adaptation strategy. So that's a pre-baked thing you can look at. You conveniently cannot see the URL. Oh, you can if you look at that screen way down there. Or you could just Google it and you'll be great. We also have, my organization does surveys of adaptation across the country, mostly in the United States. And we recently completed a survey of water resource management in the Southeast, and we did one in the past in the Great Lakes. And we have an ongoing survey in Western states. The kinds of activities fall into these 4 basic categories: capacity building, people are learning stuff; policy, there are enabling policies that are regulatory that require and allow this to happen; natural resource management and conservation activities, including enhancing the amount of area under protection, restoration, reducing non-climate stressors; and then there's infrastructure planning and development opportunities. So a couple of examples from these. This is from Newport News, Virginia. Again, because I'm giving you non-Montana examples because you're about to get 6. This is their waterworks, so their public water utility. They were facing similar things to what you're facing here with changing precipitation patterns. Additionally, they had problems with groundwater, and they're experiencing subsidence, loss of groundwater recharge resulting in subsidence. The actions that they took as part of their preparation was they already had to rebuild and refurbish some dams, but now they're doing it so that they could actually also withstand more intense 100-year storm events. So they weren't building it to the previously required code, but to a higher code. They increased their water conservation program activity to reduce consumer overuse, which I think was a nice way of saying, please use this one. And they worked on watershed health by applying land management best practices to the terrestrial systems around their watershed. In Illinois, they did I spelled that wrong, an Illinois State Water Survey. And they have drought, lack of management coordination. The number of agencies working on water seems somewhat reminiscent of what I see here in this room. And they created a suite of things through their state water survey that allowed them to evaluate their existing water facilities' ability to cope with past and future drought. They wanted to build historic and projected climate data into water supply scenarios for designing infrastructure and its function. They increased dialogue and coordination across state water planning activities so that they weren't working at cross purposes, especially when they were along similar watersheds sharing a resource. And they did cumulative impacts for use and management responses so that they could look at not just climate, not just water, but what are all the things going on. And because I promised beavers, because I really can't give a talk in the Western United States and not talk about beavers, in addition to reintroducing beavers, there are some places that are just installing beaver mimicry structures. Because of decreased late summer flows and increased stream temperatures, you can address both of those by having more of the types of ponds that beavers historically created. And if people still don't like beavers where you live, you can just mimic them, and that way you don't have to deal with that issue. They identified high flow potential basins resilient to climate change so that they could prioritize protection of those refugia. They prioritized high flow basins for whole system restoration. So if you're going to put restoration dollars into something, put it into something that's likely going to stick around, as well as there's opportunity to do some slowing down of flow, and then install these beaver mimicry structures to do just that. So, if in fact you thought that adaptation was fascinating and you didn't raise your hand earlier, but you now want to raise your hand, there are two opportunities and resources that I can offer to you that are easy. The first one Sean already brought up, which is the Climate Adaptation Knowledge Exchange, which is an online open access database that has hundreds of case studies. You can go in and type water, and you could find several hundred case studies of how other people are managing water in the face of climate change. You can also do it via a map if you just want to find out what people in Montana are doing. And if you want to share a project that you're working on or learn more face-to-face with other people, there's a biennial meeting called the National Adaptation Forum, and the next one will be in April of 2019 in Madison, Wisconsin. The call for proposals on that opens in April of this year. So I look forward to seeing some or all of you there. The reason that I'm here today is that someone who was in this room came to that a couple years ago. So without further ado, I want to get to the part that I think is really extremely interesting, which are some vignettes. And if the vignette speakers would like to come up and take seats in the beautiful wingback chairs, I am going to introduce them. While they're giving their talks, I want you to apply the knowledge you just got, because I am fundamentally a wishful college professor. So I want you to think about what the vulnerability they're addressing is, so how climate change is affecting their system, what is their adaptation strategy, how are they addressing it, and how will they know if it has worked. And you can also think about asking them those questions at the end if you feel they were insufficiently answered. So, I need to go to a different presentation to do the proper introductions. Here we go. Okay.